Ragusa comes from Fabio Lopiano, the designer of Calimala. In Ragusa, you must use your limited turns to place out buildings and trigger the actions in the 3 spaces around those buildings. To complicate matters, these will trigger off actions for other players as well. In the resource area, I would just simply earn those resources, and this is an area that doesn't trigger off for my opponents. To show that I've got the resources, I will turn the relevant card. So I now have access to 7 wine, to 3 stone, and to 6 olives. This is like a supply line. These resources never run out, apart from the fish, which can be traded in for other resources. The silver ore is used to make silver, the olives to make oil, and the grapes to make wine. These commodities can be traded and spent and will move up and down during the game. If I place in a city, this generally triggers off actions for the other players as well. So here, yellow, blue, green and red would be able to turn their silver ore into silver. And on the wall section, yellow would place a wall, followed by blue, then red would place 2 walls, and finally green would place a wall. They don't go there, I'm just demonstrating what they do. The cathedral space triggers an endgame scoring condition for the players in that space and does not react for every other player. Similarly, the rector's palace allows you to take 2 endgame scoring cards and choose one to keep. This again does not react for the other players. So here we have an example. They can give you points for fishing items you have, fishing boats items you have, for resources, for commodities, for towers, for walls, and so on and so forth. The icons in the blue circles relate to boats, which are found at the bottom of the board, and these are worth various victory points, which you take immediately upon buying them, but you must pay their cost and shift the commodity value accordingly. So this one costs 2 silver and takes the silver value down by 1. When a new one comes on, it will tell you which commodity to move, and then it will flip over to be another boat. Commodities are tracked at the top of the board, and this is how much victory points you will get for trading them immediately, or for any sets you have at the end of the game, which can be traded for points at the cathedral. The player with the most points is the winner. My first game of Calimala, the previous game from the same designer of Ragusa, was a revelation. I loved the clever action selection and action play, and the way that if you played in a certain place, that was going to give another player actions as well, and I really enjoyed that and the level of thinkiness that created. So when I heard about Ragusa, I was really excited, and my excitement was well founded. Ragusa is a wonderful game, a game that is surprisingly quick for the depth that you manage in the game. Essentially, you'll be placing out your little houses. I'm sure they've got a proper name like trade houses, but they're little houses, don't they? And taking the 3 actions that surround where you place that house. There's always going to be 3 things you can do. They will be a rural action, a city action, or perhaps a sea action, but the sea action is always to add fish. Resources in the game never run out, so you're creating this supply line. And early game, you have to place next to a tree producing resource, because you need that tree to make the house. And then you want to think about rock, because the city needs rock. So you put a house in the city, you need to have a rock supply line. And then if you place one that is in a hex as another one of your houses, you need resources for each one of those houses. So if I were to place in the same hex that my first house was in with the wood, I'd actually need 2 wood. You can take those, because your supply line changes live, that can be your second placement. But it creates this interesting thing of the early game where people are building up the resources to move into the city, but you don't want to move into the city too late, because all the good spots will be gone. So can you take some spots and get some early city building, then nip back out into the rural to put another one out to get some more resources to build in the city again, and so on. At the different player counts, this becomes a slightly different pace. We've played 3, 4, I had a look at the solo game as well, but and 2-player, there's some special houses that each player gets. But even the difference between the 3 and the 4 player is phenomenal, because on the 2-player game, you can kind of react to your opponent a bit more, but in the 3-player game, in the 3-player game, you can kind of wait. It's not going to be too long before you get into the city. You can see if someone, does it first. In a 4-player game, as soon as someone goes and starts putting walls up and towers up and taking endgame scoring options, then you really feel the pressure to try and fight against that. It's very much a tactical game where you are reacting to the other players. You need to watch what they're doing because it is very easy and possible for a player to sneak a victory by the cathedral tactic, which gives you endgame points for each set of commodities that you have, so the silver, the wine and the oil, and at their current score level. So you can get a multiplication of around 6 to 8 quite easily. So you're multiplying 6 or 8 by the amount of sets you have. If you trigger off actions for other players that let them get those commodities, those players can easily get a multiplication factor of 10 and score well over 100 points at the game end. Now that may seem like a bit of a negative, and it certainly is a powerful action, but once you've played the game once with a player who takes that route, you're going to not forget it, and you're going to do your utmost to try and stop them doing it or snatch it away from them. The fish strategy is also a strong one. There's a wharf at the bottom where you can, I think it's the wharf where you put there and you get victory points for your fish, but of course if you've got a house there, you get that every time you go round. So it creates this really clever interactive puzzle of being brave enough to go in the places that reward other people at the right time, and then perhaps pulling away from them and doing something else and forcing them to use a house, which may mean that they don't have enough houses to get what they want for the end game scoring. The other good way to score points is to build a wall, and the longest connected wall you have will score for every tower and house you have along it for your points. But again, these are places that trigger off the other houses in them. So it can be very difficult to create a long wall, but if you can pull it off, that is a great source of points. These things are much harder to do at higher player counts, because at higher player counts you get less houses to put out. So you are really going to have to go all in on the cathedral strategy for it to work, which could leave you high and dry if the other players see what you're doing and sacrifice one of their early moves to snag a cathedral spot or stop you from producing the commodities. The game plays in about half an hour, and this was on our first play as well. I don't think we get it much underneath that, but it's just phenomenal. We got through the game and we were like, is that it? But not in a bad way, in a kind of, we've done a lot in that time, and I really like that too. The prototype that I have is being fully upgraded for Kickstarter, so the 3D printed components will be wood for the Kickstarter, and they are looking at some of the graphical elements of the board to make the resources and the actions bigger so they're more easy to read. The board does get busy with houses and towers and walls, but not in a visually cluttered way. I really like the way it looks as these different coloured houses start going out and these towers get put up. I think it looks really good. The biggest problem we had was in understanding the initial placement rules for the houses, and that's partly because games don't often give you resources that don't run out. They just create a supply line that you always have access to, and partly because you're kind of looking at 3 hexes as you judge these, and as the board stands in its prototype form, the hexes aren't that well defined. Personally, I think they look beautiful. I agree that they don't often look like hexes in many ways, but I was hesitant to see a hex grid laid over it to make it clearer, because I think it clicks in your first game and the game is so short that it doesn't matter. However, they are going to overlay a dotted line, and I imagine it, looking at how the rest of the board is laid out, this will be quite a subtle effect and might just help with those first games. Define what areas you're putting into. So common sense updates from the creator. My concerns that the cathedral route would be too powerful. After a few plays, they were put to rest just by playing again with people who'd played it before. That is going to be, if you're playing a first game with someone, it's going to be hard to resist going the cathedral route. I made sure to tell everyone in future games that the cathedral route is very powerful, but can be stopped quite easily. Ragusa if I'm probably saying it wrong, but Ragusa is going to be, I think, the 5th game that I've previewed that I'm actually going to back. So it's another one that is money where my mouth is. Maybe I should make a little board, deck and dice. Money where my mouth is award. But this will certainly be one. I love the designer, I love Calimala, and I love Ragusa. Calimala is probably more, how do one of the players put it, more elegant in terms of the moves and stuff, more tidy as it goes along, but Ragusa is quicker and to get into and to play, but somehow doesn't sacrifice that depth. Big winner for me, big recommendation for me. Ragusa is one that I think if you like Calimala, if you like Euro-style games, if you're looking for a quick playing one of resource management with generous resources, and you see why the resources are generous, and kind of changing commodities that you can adapt to, then this is a strong recommendation for me. Ragusa is one to check out when it comes out on Kickstarter on the 20th, and the link, as always, will be down in the description below. Thanks very much for watching Board, Deck and Dice. We will see you next time.